Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Expert Exchange, where we address real questions with expert answers. My name is Morgan Taylor. I'm the editor for Abode Magazine here at the Houston Apartment Association. And as always, I am your moderator. Today, Gina Erwin with GWR Management is returning to host for us today. Thank you so much, Gina, for joining us.
Thank you for having me back.
All right, today is Wednesday, March 24th, and today's topic is post-freeze landscaping. We will also touch on some pool prep for future freezes as well. Before I turn it over to our host, I'm going to review some housekeeping items. This series is designed to offer quick 30-minute sessions, but because this is a complex issue, we will stay on as long as necessary to answer all of your questions. You may ask your questions in the Zoom chat box or in the comments via Facebook Live. If you can't stay on for long, you can find this session on our YouTube channel, HAATV, later today. We have a significant number of questions we came up with, so once we make it to the end of our list, we will get to your questions. A quick disclaimer, we are not public health experts nor attorneys. This webinar is provided for general information purposes only and does not constitute legal or professional advice. No member should act on the basis of any material contained in the webinar without obtaining proper legal or other professional advice specific to their situation. Please consult with your management company or property owner to address specific issues and to form your own company guidelines. With that, I'll turn it over to our host, Gina Erwin.
You're getting pretty good at that disclaimer. You probably have it memorized by now. Thank you again for having me. Again, my name is Gina Erwin. I am a 2021 Vice President at Large for Houston Apartment Association, and I'm happy to be back hosting again, filling in. We have really, I'm excited about the guests we have today. From Outdoor Elements, we have three people that are going to be with us to talk about a really great topic, and the timing is perfect. We have Asia Payne, we have Roberto Higueros, and Dane Anderson. Thank you all for being with us today. We're excited to have you.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. Well, before we dive into our questions, I do want to read your bios. I want to give everyone a little bit of information about you, and I'm going to read them so I don't butcher them. Asia has worked in the industry for over 15 years in many different capacities, starting with her own landscaping company. She ventured into the nursery and growing side of the industry. Asia has since managed maintenance and installation for two Houston companies. She specializes in design, plant and turf maintenance, and pest and disease management. Roberto is our pool expert of the group, and he has 21 years of swimming pool experience, new construction, remodel, and leak detection, specializing in plumbing. And last, certainly not least, is Dane Anderson. He's a sales manager for Outdoor Elements who spent almost 4 years in property management working on site as a director. All right, we got someone that's been on both sides. Thank you all again for joining us. We're super excited. So today's topic is kind of interesting. You know, the freeze was almost a month ago, maybe even to the day. And this particular topic that I think everybody has kicked down the road while we've been in sort of triage mode in the property management business, we've been kind of taking care of leaks and doing all that. So everyone has just sort of pushed back landscaping and said, okay, well, we'll deal with that once we know if our stuff is dead or alive. And I think we're starting to approach that point. So all of these questions are related to landscaping and then a little bit on pools too. So let's start with the first kind of easy question as it relates to covering plants. Do you cover them? Do you don't? It looks like, you know, in many cases they were covered and they froze anyway. So does that mean it was done wrong? I mean, can you just kind of touch on covering plants and what that should look like?
Sure. This freeze was relentless in the fact that it was also wet. And freeze cloth is not designed to keep your plants dry. And I mean, it can prevent a little bit of moisture, obviously, but once it gets wet like it was and heavy, and we actually had snow, it sticks to the plants. There's absolutely nothing we could have done or anyone could have done this time. I haven't seen anything that was covered that was protected. Everything I saw was affected just as badly as anything else. So really, there's nothing you can do. If you have very expensive plants in your landscape, like large birds of paradise, for example, if you wanted to plant those again and you did want to try to cover those, it would be quite a chore. You would have to get propane heaters and put them underneath and put lights around them. So again, it's definitely not something you could have done this time. And if it ever happens again, you wouldn't be able to prevent it either.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Propane heaters, man, that sounds like a fire waiting to happen.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a process. I mean, it's a process. I mean, you would have had to keep refilling them, and it's just not, our plants that are planted here were not designed to hold up under that stress.
That makes sense. All right. That totally makes sense then. So even if we did cover them, even if we did it right, and because of the moisture, I hear what you're saying. That makes sense that some of it worked and some of it didn't. So it was kind of a moot point.
Yeah.
So how do we know as we go forward what is repairable damage versus what are we supposed to toss? How do we know what's alive?
So our opinions during the first week or two after the freeze were that a lot more was dead than actually was, because we've never ever had the opportunity to see that amount of snow and ice and rain and freezing temperatures for that long. We had no idea of things like foxtails, dianella, irises, all things that are commonly used here, if they were going to make it. So they looked bad. I mean, they looked very, very dead. So rather than ripping them all out, what we did was we had all of our foremen go back, and everybody should be doing this. So you want to make sure that your landscape company is coming in and identifying the plants that are going to come back and is cutting them down. Like, they need to be cut down very soon, because you want those to start flushing back out. And for shrubbery, the good rule of thumb is on woody shrubs, if a plant starts dropping all of its leaves after the freeze, they turn brown and then they start falling off everywhere. Waxleaf ligustrum was a really good example of that. It's used everywhere on the properties here, and they started dropping their leaves literally the week after the freeze. That's a good sign. That means that the branches are still alive and they're forcing leaves off of them so that they can put on new growth. If the shrubs are holding their leaves for weeks at a time, and you'll see these around, Suspensum viburnum is a really good example of that. It's planted everywhere on properties because it does really well in shade. They have all their leaves on them still, and they smell like decay. They smell like literally like feet right now. And you can smell them on all these properties. So we've been going around like emergency to try to pull them out of all these properties because they're against people's patios. Nobody wants to walk out back and smell these rotting plants. So, but they held on to their leaves. And that's usually a pretty bad sign. If the roots are loose at the base, you can jiggle the plant and the roots are very loose. That probably means that they rotted and died. If the plants are still really tight in the ground and their roots are still hanging on, that's a good sign that you probably have some life left. The only way to know now at this point, if you have a landscaper that has really been paying attention, then they can tell you right now what's going to live and what isn't. My team members and I, basically, we've been having daily meetings to say, what have we seen on this property? What have we seen on this property that's alive? What's dead? I mean, we had at one property, we thought there was going to be about $200,000 worth of plants that had to be replaced because it was all tropicals. It turns out 3 weeks later that we're down to like 50,000 because they're alive. So don't let your landscaper tell you that they're dead and let them pull everything out without giving it a little bit more time, because there are things that we never thought would come back. And they're making a comeback. I mean, birds of paradise are one, and they're very expensive and they're used everywhere, and they're coming back. So your landscaper really needs to know what they're looking for. And if things are going to make a comeback, they need to be cut back very soon.
Okay, you said something in the beginning of this that I want to circle back on. When you said it cut them down, I've heard conflicting information. Do you cut until you get to something green, or did you just go to the ground and start over?
Okay, so yeah, you could cut back to the green. Basically, it depends on the shrub. It depends on the plant. Shrubs are going to be pruned differently than plants. So when I say plants, I'm talking about things like foxtail ferns, dianella, irises, versus a woody branchy shrub. So shrubs, you're going to tip prune all the way on the outside for the most part. and just don't worry about the stuff in the middle. The dead stuff is going to fall off for the most part. But the other plants, like your foxtail ferns, your dianellas, your irises, your Asian jasmine, just hack them all the way to the ground. I mean, the guys are literally using weed eaters to just hack them all down. And they're coming back. I mean, we have foxtail ferns that are already 12 inches tall again within the last 2 weeks. So, but we've also been fertilizing. So you have to also make sure that your landscaper is fertilizing. Everything used all of its nutrients to survive that freeze. And if it doesn't get an immediate nutrient dose, like a liquid fertilizer, you're going to wait a lot longer until your property looks good again.
Got it. Okay, perfect. That's super helpful. Great information. Okay, let's shift over to trees for a little bit. So all our trees look like they're absolutely dead. So, you know, sort of the same questions. How do you know if the trees are dead or if they're still salvageable? And then I want to follow that. I want to kind of shift once you answer that question into the palms, because I think the palms are more specifically different than, you know, the regular oak trees.
Sure. So, okay, other than palm trees, there's not a lot of trees that are dead. So there are what we call here a small ornamental tree, like a Japanese blueberry or a bottle brush tree or a crepe myrtle. That's another good one. You can have a crepe myrtle shrub or you can have a Japanese blueberry shrub. So they're really just large shrubs, small trees. So Japanese blueberries and bottle brush, they did not make it. They're most likely done. If you want to check and see, you can scrape the trunk and you can scrape some of the branches and see if you see any green. I'm sure, you know, everybody's heard of doing that before. And of course, that's absolutely true. You scrape it, see if you get any green. If you don't get any green, it's going to take Japanese blueberries and bottle brush trees about 2 to 3 more months before their trunks are going to start splitting. Then you're going to know that they're dead. If they're going to put on any new growth, you're going to have to trim them back, tip prune them all the way around, and you will see tiny new growth coming out of those within the next couple, maybe 2 weeks once you prune them. If you don't see anything though, after 2 weeks, I mean, we're taking out Japanese blueberries. When I worked for a grower, when I managed a nursery, we grew Japanese blueberries. And in the freeze of 2018, which was only 24 hours, all of our Japanese blueberries died. Within 2 months, all the trunks were splitting. They held their leaves. They looked terrible. Nothing helped. So they're just not designed to take that freeze. Same thing with bottle brush. A lot of people have bottle brush trees here. The same thing happened with bottle brush. But other than those two that people really consider to use as trees here, everything else is fine. All the hardwood trees, cherry laurels did fine. Anything that has needles, which are conifers, so anything that kind of looks like a Christmas tree, those are all perfectly fine. I mean, you think of those out in Colorado, the Northeast. I mean, those are fine. They like the winter. It doesn't bother them. Italian cypress, things like that. Hardwood trees like crepe myrtles, oaks, maples, none of those have an issue. They're all fine. They're deciduous. They drop their leaves in the winter and they go dormant anyway. So they're perfectly fine. It's really just the bottle brush trees, the Japanese blueberries, and then of course the palms.
Okay, got it. So let's shift over to the palms because some of them seem more hardy than others. I know the queens. I even have one at my house. It looks like it's just
it's
never
dead.
coming back. Yeah, it's probably dead. But some of them do seem more hardy than the others. So can you maybe talk about the different varieties we have here in Texas?
Of course. So what the variety? Okay, so the number one that's on everybody's properties, and there's so many of them, and they are dead, is the Mexican fan palms. There's tons and tons of Mexican fan palms. I'm gonna assume that maybe they were sold pretty cheaply back in the time when all these were installed, and that's why so many people use so many of them around here. Unfortunately, there's no way they can make it through. So those palms, also medjool palms, those have like the tall spiky, they're really tall, big, they have tall spiky looking. Queen palms, king palms, Sylvester palms, those did not make it. None of those are designed to take that temperature. None of those. Those are designed for zone 10 and to let you know, we're zone 8A and B. So we're far from zone 10. So when you're taking a risk when you're using something, I mean, you never would have thought this would happen. But so if you don't want to go ahead and take those palms down, because it's a massive expense, it's expensive to have them cut down. It's expensive to have them replaced. If you don't want to cut them down, you do need to go ahead and get all of the fronds trimmed off. You've got to trim the fronds off. You need to get the dead foliage off, and get a root drench fertilization done. It's a liquid fertilization. It should not cost you much money. Your landscaping company should be able to do it for you. I know that we do it for our customers. We're root drenching all palms, even the ones that didn't freeze but took a little bit of damage, just so that we can get all that new growth pushed out. It's a good high quality liquid organic fertilization, and you can do it once a month. You can do it once. Anything is better than nothing, but you do have to get the dead fronds off. You can wait. If you don't see any new growth within 12 months, that palm's dead. And you've got to remember that those palms will fall over like a matchstick. They'll just break right from the base. And if we get Houston wet weather, like we usually seem to get every year or two, those will rot at the base and they will fall right over. So you really do need to be careful with those, and make sure that you use, a reputable tree company to come out and take them down. We've been doing so many bids for them and removing so many of them, which is good. Now, replacement. I do not recommend anybody replace these palms with the same palm. Obviously, that goes without saying. I mean, if nobody wants to run into this expense again. I've got a property that has 55 of them, and they're probably 50 feet tall. So right now they're getting them all cut down, and that's taking a couple weeks to be finished. And then they're replacing. What they're going to replace with is exactly what I recommend, is Texas sabal or Florida sabal. I realize that Florida sabal sounds like it has to be from Florida, but it's not. They're actually, a lot of them are grown here in Texas. The sabals look so much like the Mexican fan palms. Most people wouldn't know the difference. The only issue people need to remember that you're going to run into if you're replacing your palms is, number one, you're not going to get a palm that's taller than 25 feet of trunk, because that's as big of a tree as they can fit on an 18-wheeler to bring to you. So there's palm farms all over the place, and I've been on the phone with them for a month straight now, and they are literally selling 18-wheelers full of palms, like 6 of them a week. So they're going to run out. Everybody's going to run out eventually of these sabals. And so you can get the ones that are maybe 10 feet tall up to 25 feet tall, that, you can get them installed, all that good stuff. But it's going to be a while to wait. So if you know that you want to replace palm trees on your property and you feel like it really is important to your bottom line to have that look, I recommend doing it within the next 3 to 4 weeks, if that, if not sooner, because once they sell through these trees, I mean, even Florida is selling out. Like, the landscapers in Florida are up in arms because everybody in Texas is taking all their material. I'm not even kidding you. This is the weirdest thing you've ever seen. Like, it's a migration of material, and Florida is about to be out. So once that happens, there won't be sellable trees again. 12 months, 18 months, 2 years, it's going to take a while. So just keep that in mind. I'm working with a lot of these properties to get these through on insurance claims as quickly as possible. Otherwise, they're going to go maybe a year or two without the palms. So if you have a good tree guy, you should have a good tree guy. Your good tree guy can come out and he can go up and look in the crown of these palms. You're going to have to pay, because he's going to have to bring a climber, but he's going to bring a climber out and he's going to look in the top, and he's going to check and see if it's rotted and if it's mushy. If it's mushy, he can tell you right away it's dead. If the tree looks like it has collapsed and there's just you can tell what it looks like. It looks like it collapsed. Everything on top is just laying flat down. It's dead. You may see a little bit of green coming out that didn't get frozen, but don't let that fool you into thinking that it's not dead and dangerous to have on the property, because that happens all the time and they're still dead. That leaf just hasn't folded down yet. So yeah, that's the spiel on the palms. It's a huge issue, and it's a huge expense for these properties. So my heart goes out.
It is a big issue, and it's very widespread. I don't think anyone's been touched by that one. Okay, I have my little list of questions here, and a couple of them you already touched on. So I'm going to scoot down to some commonly used plants that may have sustained some damage. How do we know, or how can we tell that they might come back? And then is there anything we can do to sort of facilitate that process to make sure that they do come back?
Sure. So A really commonly used plant here is azaleas. So azaleas looked like junk after the freeze. They lost all their leaves, which was unfortunate because it's azalea season now. And usually we have the azalea trail in Houston and everybody gets to go see these beautiful lush azaleas blooming. But those guys are actually blooming. So we're still getting blooms. They started putting on blooms the week after the freeze. So it didn't bother them, but they do need a lot of energy to produce their leaves and flush out, look like they should. Again, like I said, even if a plant wasn't killed, it has been hit. So it's been injured. So anything that you can give it, like liquid fertilization, especially liquid organic, is going to help all these things get healthy again, which in turn is going to help them get through the summer. And you know, the heat of the summer is a hit. It's the hit on the plants every year. So the goal is to have everything as healthy as possible so that during the summer here, those plants can focus on getting water and not so much putting on new growth. Boxwoods are very commonly used here. They burned, the whole outside of the boxwoods burned, but now that we've let them grow, you don't want to injure the plants right away. So we've actually let the boxwoods grow out for the last couple of weeks. And then next week, our crews will start trimming them down and getting the burn tips off. But they're fine. They look fine. Roses, which are commonly used here, knockout roses especially, but roses in general absolutely loved the freeze. We are going to have like the best year for roses this year. I'm really excited. I love roses and they do really well. And they really are low maintenance if they're just planted where they should be and not overwatered. But they started flushing out and putting new growth on the week after the freeze. I couldn't believe it. I mean, everywhere I go, the roses are just massive and their leaves look healthy. They don't have any fungus. And also Laura petalum. I don't know if people are familiar, but Laura petalum is a beautiful shrub that we use here. It's got a purple or burgundy leaf and little pink fringe flowers on it. And it also loved the freeze. It got a little bit of burnt on the tips, but the last 2 weeks, I mean, it's like way earlier than normal for it to be so big and blooming right now. So that's actually kind of a benefit. Those ended up looking pretty good, but
that's exciting. What about?
Yeah, but I mean, pretty much liquid fertilization is super important right now. Okay. I know it seems like just kind of a like to, but it really is something that you need to do. It's going to save you a lot of money in the long run because it's going to help these plants come back. And the waiting period is going to be so much shorter to get your property back to looking where it was before if you liquid fertilize, you know, because if you don't, these plants are going to struggle and it's going to take twice the amount of time.
Got it. Okay. And then what about mulch? Fertilizer you touched on. What about mulch?
You should always have mulch here. Now, I don't mean like a big pile, like a volcano around your trees. Established trees do not need to be mulched. It's much better to just plant a ground cover or something underneath them, but never up around the trunks. You should never put mulch around the trunks. It keeps the trunks wet. They'll get pests and disease and it's no good for the tree. But beds and open bed space should always be mulched because it keeps the moisture in the soil consistent, which is what you want. You don't want plants swinging from super dry to super wet and back and forth, because every time that happens, the plant has to readjust again. So if you heap mulch on your soil, it will keep the moisture consistent. It won't be too much, won't be too little. And it also prevents weeds. You know, you don't have to deal with as many weeds. Mulch is an inexpensive way to keep your landscape alive. Really, it is. You know, if you don't mulch, as it breaks down in the soil, it's feeding your plants. So natural hardwood mulch is the best mulch you can use. I personally do not recommend dyed mulch. The dye is not super good for the plants and it makes a big mess. So natural hardwood mulch, and at about 2.5 to 3 inches is what you should keep your beds.
Got it. Liquid fertilizer, then mulch. I think we've been abundantly clear about that.
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about turf. What about our grass? Did we murder all of our grass last month?
No, not at all. The grass is fine. Again, when plants are dormant, you don't really have to worry about them. We are spoiled here in Houston because we're used to being able to have plants that will grow for us all year long, you know, and like tropicals that are going to be green even in the winter. But then we get this kind of freeze and all of a sudden we remember that we're not actually a tropical environment here. So but the grass here is fine. It's dormant in the winter. What we've done is we waited 2 weeks after the freeze, and then, which I don't recommend other than this, we scalped the lawns. So we cut them at a very low mower setting. That is what was recommended to me by A&M. So I go with A&M, the AgriLife Extension. I follow a lot of their earth kind, gardening advice. So we scalped them, and then we have fertilized with organic granular fertilizer, and we're getting a lot of green ups. We're getting quite a few green ups, and we do not have the sprinklers on yet. You do not have to water your lawn yet. I wait until the very last minute. You really want to try to be conservative with water here. It seems like you'd have to be the other way, but most things get overwatered here, not underwater. And the lawn is probably number one of what gets overwatered here. So St. Augustine, Bermuda, Zoysia, those are all designed to be drought tolerant. You do not need to turn your sprinklers on for another 2 weeks. And then when you do, you just put them on for 2 days a week. And if it's sunny spots for your lawn, maybe 5 minutes right now. You don't need a lot of time, but let your lawn rest right now. You can go ahead and mow your lawn very short, put down your spring green up, whatever you want to use, and the lawn's going to be perfectly fine.
Okay, finally some good news. Okay, that's great. You said in the very, very beginning that this was just sort of a kind of hard to head off and save a lot of the stuff that we had, just because it wasn't just the cold, it was the moisture and the snow and the wetness. Is there anything that we can do on a go forward basis to better prevent damage, assuming it's not something that's coupled with snow, which was super unusual, obviously, in Houston? Is there anything we can do preventively going forward, should this come our way again?
The only way to prevent all this damage to your property, honestly, is to use plants in the landscape that can handle that freeze. Really, that's the only way. Because we talked about covering, that wouldn't have helped. And I mean, it can cost in the thousands to buy that much freeze cloth anyway, to cover all these properties, that just wouldn't even happen. So the next best thing is to substitute. Get your landscapers to work with you and tell you which shrubs are fine, which shrubs did not take a hit. There's plants, trees, and shrubs that are fine. Some of them, like Dianella, foxtails, those are going to be fine. They're growing back. So you can use those again. I mean, it's not a huge deal to have to cut them down. They're going to be fully grown again within the summer. It's not going to take a long time. But on the tropicals, most of the tropicals, and like the Japanese blueberries, the bottle brush, I know they're beautiful. And I know the oleanders were another one. People love oleanders here, and oleanders are toast. I haven't seen any that are alive. And it's a look that you can't really get with anything else, but there are substitutes you can make that I think people would like just as well and would make it through the freeze. So that's really the number one way to prevent this, is by using substitutions for your palms and your small ornamental trees, your plants, and your shrubs that, use plants that are going to make it through, and keep those plants healthy, because there are plants that didn't make it through the freeze only because they were not healthy already. They weren't going to make it, because other ones that I've seen made it. But a lot of the plants are neglected on properties that are, especially larger properties. And so over time, they just break down. So that, you have to prevent that by keeping plants healthy in the first place.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, this was highly unusual. And those of us that have been around long enough remember the last time it froze like this in Houston was in 1989. I remember it was my first year in the business, but we didn't have the snow. It just got super cold.
This was crazy. It was crazy.
Yeah, so we got a 100-year flood that was never supposed to happen, and we got this.
So that is exactly why, if you want to save money, use substitute plants, use something else, because you don't want this. This could literally happen again next year. Okay. And where would you be? So there are substitutions out there. You just have to work with somebody that knows what to use.
Gotcha. Okay, super helpful. Great information. Let's shift over. I got a couple of different subjects that I want to get to. Let's shift over to sprinkler systems, our irrigation systems. What can we do to facilitate protecting the sprinkler systems should this happen again? Should we have another big freeze like this?
So everybody should know that your backflows need to be turned off, And all that means is the two little levers on your backflow need to be turned both horizontal. So they're both turned horizontal, you'll know it's off. And then there's a little tiny screw on the back of the valve that usually the maintenance guys know this and they know how to do it. We help a lot of our clients do it. We went out literally like the day before the storm just to make sure, and we would just drain the system by turning this little screw. It literally takes 5 minutes or less to do all of this. That's huge. That will prevent a lot of issues. However, there were plenty of systems that still had pipes bust. Even though we turned the backflow off, even though we flushed the system, these pipes were not, they just weren't designed to handle that freeze, I guess, and standing water. Do you know even better than I do?
Yeah,
Maybe not.
So most anything that gets buried is usually fine. Usually what happens is when you have standing water in any type of plumbing, whether it's house plumbing, irrigation lines, anything that's going to be exposed, the water is going to freeze, swell, and bust the pipe. So even when you do have, where you're able to drain it, you're only able to drain just below the vacuum breaker. So the rest of the line is going to continue to have water. So anything that was holding water, more than likely broke.
Yeah, there was a lot. It was everywhere. It was like one property after the next had pipes bust, even when they were just turning it back on, because they did turn it off. They did what they were supposed to. So unfortunately, it's one of those things where I don't think there's anything else you could do to prevent it other than to turn your backflow off and drain the system.
The only other thing would be, even though I did see a lot of lines that were wrapped, they're not wrapped properly. And that's the other thing that you could do is wrap them, and that's about as much as you can do, is just wrap everything properly and make sure it's protected as much as possible.
Gotcha. Okay, I did forget one quick question that I want to circle back on before I go to pool pumps, because pools are important. Spring planting, which we all would normally be doing now. Is it too soon for us to start putting new plants in the ground?
No, not at all. People are going bananas. So garden centers are literally having like record years right now because people are just going out. And I don't know if it's because, COVID, more people have been at home and they want to enhance the surrounding where they spend the most time, or if it's the freeze made people just crazy for plants, but literally they're just selling out of everything. So I would say get out there and start buying your stuff, putting it in the ground. No, I mean, yeah, plant. You can plant here almost all year.
Perfect. All right. So the plumbers all got wealthy, and now the growers are.
This is true. That is 100% true.
Hey, make hay while you can. We might have a drought soon. Okay. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about quickly is pool pumps. And I think the big curveball here was probably more losing power than it was the freeze. I think everybody knows the obvious answers. Keep your pool pump running. If you've got a heated pool, keep it running. But we had the double whammy with losing power, which sort of ruined that whole kind of approach. What do we do with those on a go-forward basis?
So like you said, the basic thing to do is to keep everything running. But in the events that you do lose power, like we did, especially for as long as we did, you want to drain the systems. So you want to have your maintenance guys come in, open up the pumps, turn off the equipment, shut off breakers, because what you don't want to happen is power to come back on intermediately like we had, and have pumps running dry because they had broken pipes and the flow of water wasn't working. But you want to try to drain the system as much as possible, leave everything open. Again, like I said, anything that's holding water and is going to get the elements to it is going to cause to freeze up and break. And there's not much else you can do other than drain the systems. And like I said, make sure that you turn off the breakers to everything, because you don't know when it's going to come back on or who's going to be available to come out to the equipment to make sure everything is running properly or that nothing is broken. Because the other thing that does happen too is that the suction sides may be fine, the pump turns back on, but something on the return side is broken. Now you're draining the pool while it's running when it came back on, and no one's aware that it's actually happening. But yeah, draining the equipment is the easiest. There's plugs on the filters, there's plugs on the pumps. Take the lids off, open up any siphon valves that you have, and just drain everything as much as possible.
Gotcha. Okay, that's super helpful. I'm looking at my list. I mean, I think that does it. Gosh, you guys have been so super helpful. Morgan, I'm gonna reach out. I can see chat red dots, and I see Q&A red dots, but I haven't opened them, so I'm gonna turn it over to you to handle that part.
Asia, you did You were so informative. I only have a couple questions. Someone wanted to know about Red Sisters.
They're dead.
No.
I'm sorry. That is one I didn't mention because we use Cordyline and Red Sisters a lot here, and there's really no good substitute for it. And I've been racking my brain trying to figure out what a good substitute would be to plug in these areas because we use it in a lot of properties. It is not meant to grow here. It really isn't. It's meant to grow like in, the tropics and the Philippines or something. So we're kind of pushing it, having it up here anyway. Unfortunately, what I would say, if you really want those in your property, I'm going to go and put some more back in these properties, just in smaller quantities in the, in the wow areas, the fronts by the pool, just a few here and there, but I'm going to fill in with other stuff. Fire spike. And if anybody wants to take that note down, there's a plant called fire spike that is really awesome. It will come back, and it gives you a pop of color and kind of a tropical look that you can use instead of the Red Sister.
Perfect. Thank you. And last question, what about Chinese fringe trees?
Oh, yeah. So that's questionable. I haven't seen any sign of life yet in them. But I have seen, well, no. They look like they're not alive, but I have seen a little bit of green in the branches. So I'm leaving them alone right now. I would hate to pull out a tree that will be fine. What I would do is go and tip prune them. So just take off a few inches all the way around, and maybe any branches that are rubbing against each other and things like that. Remember, if they start dropping their leaves, that's a really good sign, but the ones I've seen are holding on to their leaves, so I'm not sure yet. So that one's still up in the air. I would watch and see and fertilize it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Asia. You're
welcome.
So thorough and so informative. Thank you so much for your expertise.
You're welcome.
All right.
Yeah, this has been super helpful. I want to ask a question for me. You were so pointed on the Red Sisters, which I personally have to love, and we have lots of them. I want to ask you about Crotons too. That's the last thing I want to ask you.
No. Okay, so Crotons are really here. They're kind of like when you get like the gifty plants, like a gifty hydrangea or a poinsettia or something like that. They're really only going to last most of the time here through a season, and that season's usually going to be fall and winter and early spring. If you're lucky, sometimes you get lucky and you put them in a really great spot and it happens to love where you plant it in a pot or in the beds. They will last you for a long time, but they won't ever come. Once Crotons are dead, you don't even want to bother trying to bring them back because I hate to say they're a throwaway plant, but they aren't going to multiply here. They aren't going to get much bigger. They're not going to come back from a cutting.
Gotcha.
And what about gardenias? That question just came in.
So I think gardenias are fine. I actually saw one the other day that was putting buds on, even though its leaves are burnt. What I would do with the gardenias is, because they're a little bit touchy anyway, they can be a little finicky, especially with water and sunlight. So I would say maybe don't even tip prune them yet. Wait another month and see if they start dropping their leaves. And if they do, just leave it alone. Let it start coming back. Fertilize it. Give it a liquid fertilizer. Microlife is a fantastic organic fertilizer. That's what I use. They're here in Houston. And you can get it at Ace Hardware, or you can order it online on Amazon, and fertilize those gardenias and see if they'll come back. I bet that they'll probably end up putting little leaf buds on in the next month or so. If you see no green in the branches though, now you can probably assume that they're dead, but just do the scratch test. Just scratch the branches and see if you see any green.
Perfect.
Got it.
Very
helpful. Love the scratch test. Yeah, super helpful. Okay, any more questions, Morgan, before we close it out?
That's it.
Okay, gosh, you guys, Asia, Roberto, and Dane, you guys have been so amazing. This is going to be a hot topic. People, if they're not watching live, I'm certain they're going to tune in and watch this one. You've been so helpful. I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
We appreciate you all, Phil.
Yes, and thank you, Gina, for stepping in today to host. Join us next time, Wednesday, April 14th, where we will interview Yardi on apartment tours. Until then, make it a great day. Thank you all so much.